Let's go back to the American Capitol and speak to Darrell Kimball. He's the Executive Director of the Arms Control Association. Darrell, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for your time. I mean, we don't know many of the details that are in these written responses that NATO and the US have given, but Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, said, we are going to make and have made offers that will de-escalate the tension in the region as a whole. And one of those offers is about moving some NATO hardware, including possible discussions about where nuclear weapons are placed in the territory of NATO allies. What is Russia's position on that, as far as you know, and how can the Western allies help assuage those Russian concerns?
Well, as your reporting shows, the fundamental difference between the United States and NATO and Russia over the principles of NATO membership, there's really no room for compromise. But I would note that Russia understands that there has been no new NATO member on its border added to the alliance since 2004, and the Ukrainian NATO membership is not on the horizon. So I think when Putin put his proposals down, he knew that. And he did include some other ideas in his proposals, which the United States and NATO have responded to. And as you said, the Secretary General has outlined in a speech this afternoon, he's given us some clues about what the NATO alliance and Washington are proposing to address mutual security concerns. And I think that there actually is room for diplomacy on confidence-building measures, on arms control that serves to reduce the force concentrations along the common frontier. I don't know how specific the NATO proposals were. They would also like to see Russia phase down and decrease the troop concentrations on the common frontier. There are also proposals from NATO and the United States to reduce the possibility of large-scale military exercises near one another's borders that have created a lot of concern on both sides. And there are proposals in there responding to Russia's suggestion that there be arms limitations on intermediate range missiles in the European zone. There's a possibility both sides could begin deploying nuclear-capable intermediate range missiles now that the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty is gone. And of course, there's a broader nuclear arms control agenda that has to be pursued between the U.S. and Russia to replace the only remaining treaty limiting their strategic nuclear stockpiles, the New START Treaty, which will go away in early 2026. So I think there's room for discussions. The old saying from Winston Churchill, jaw is better than war. And it's a good sign, I think, if in the next few days the Russian president agrees to further discussions with the United States through the Lavrov-Blinken channel on these and other issues. But in the meantime, it's important that NATO help reinforce Ukraine's ability to ward off a further incursion by Russia into Ukrainian territory and to make it clear what the price is if Russia pursues that very dangerous path.
Okay, I mean, just in the last part of your answer there, you pretty much given me the response to my next question, which was going to be about whether it might be irresponsible, actually, of the West and NATO to be sending all of this lethal assistance to Ukraine and to other Eastern European NATO members. Presumably, you think it's the right thing to do.
Well, there's a right kind of lethal assistance and there's a wrong kind. And I think President Biden and NATO have been very careful to make sure that what they're sending is defensive aid, weapons that can be used to thwart a further Russian invasion, and not weapons that have the capability of reaching into Russian territory. That's a very important distinction. What Russia publicly says it's concerned about is the deployment of NATO forces that can reach into Russia's territory from the existing NATO alliance and in the future from Ukrainian territory. So the provision of lethal defensive aids assistance is, I think, appropriate here. Anti-tank weapons, short-range rockets, fuel and supplies for the Ukrainian forces. That is, I think, what is useful and important.
Darrell, briefly, if you don't mind, if there were to be a conflict, what sort of conflict might it be?
Very bad, in the sense that, I think there's the potential for a protracted war in a wider part of Ukraine. Your reporter there on the ground in Donbass was showing you the effects of years of a protracted low-level conflict. I think Russia would certainly be able to capture large part of Ukrainian territory. But they would get bogged down, and there would be essentially a guerrilla counteroffensive against Russian forces. And if it continues, and if NATO forces are drawn in directly or indirectly, the worst possible outcome would be a direct conflict between NATO and Russian forces, which could escalate. And furthermore, U.S., Russian, and European Russian relations would go down the tubes. A lot of other things that the two sides need to work on together would not be possible. I mentioned one of those, the need to negotiate further cuts in the bloated nuclear stockpiles of the U.S. and Russia. That would be very, very difficult to achieve. So clearly, as Secretary Blinken has said, the preferred path is diplomacy. But the ball is, I think, in President Putin's court to consider how to respond to the proposals from NATO and the United States.
Darrell, really appreciate it. Thank you so much indeed. Darrell Kimball from the Arms Control Association.